All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. We got another movie review today. Jack and I are talking this time about The Conversation, a film by Francis Ford Coppola, nominated for Best Picture in 1974 or 75, however you count it, and starring Gene Hackman. So, roughly speaking, we talked about this last time after the stream, but we've got like a rough framework we're going to operate with today where we're going to talk about the story, the cast, the filmmaking, and the response to the movie. And I'm sure we'll have some overlap as we talk about those different elements. But I guess let's just start with story. So, Jack, you've seen this one before. This is the first time I've watched it. What was it like
Yeah,
seeing it the second time or third
boy,
time?
I was totally surprised by it the second time that I saw it. I guess I was just so struck by how different it was than everything else I've ever seen from Francis Ford Coppola.
Mm-hmm.
And granted, I haven't seen that much, and the only stuff that I can even really remember much of is the Godfather 1 and 2.
Yeah.
But I was just I was really caught off guard by the style of the movie. It was really surprising to me, even having seen it once before. What were your impressions seeing it the first time?
Well, speaking to your point about how different it is from the rest of his works, I think there's some overlap that I see in terms of, if not like outright thematic elements, like some elements of production, like the blood in the toilet near the end, like all that blood, and the backdrop I have behind me right now, which is like a screen grab from the dream sequence. I think both of those elements, the heavy mist and the heavy blood, come back in a big way in Bram Stoker's Dracula in the early 90s.
That's
But definitely,
funny.
I think there's a lot of differences between, say, this and The Godfather. And that might be ultimately, most of the movies I've seen by Coppola, because I've never seen, for example, Tucker, A Man in His Dream. And I couldn't even tell you, I probably could if I thought about it, but I don't know too well the rest of the movies. Also interesting, though, you probably already know this. I'm sure most of the viewers know this too. One of the other movies this was up against in 1975 for Best Picture was The Godfather Part 2. So he had two Best Picture nominees that same year, which is unusual, but not unheard of. There's been directors that have done that before and since, like Hitchcock did it, John Ford did it, the guy who directed Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz did it. And I think most recently, Steven Soderbergh did it with Traffic and Aaron Brockovich in 2000, 2001.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, no, I guess we'll talk a little bit more about that in the response, but it was so weird to me to think about people seeing these two movies at the same time. I guess getting into the story of The Conversation, I described it to my wife Bailey as it's really just one guy listening to two people have a conversation over and over and over again. And that's the movie. And I read some people talk about how Coppola uses in this movie, rather than giving more information, gaining depth about the information you already have as a tool. And I thought that was really interesting, because that's really the experience of the story, is constantly chipping away a little bit at the information that you already have. So for me, seeing it a second time, I already understand kind of the great dramatic irony that is effect. What is it like to walk through that the first time, as it's starting to reveal what's going on with this couple and what their relationship is to whoever has hired Gene Hackman's character?
Well, it's set up like as a mystery. Like there is, you could suspect that there's like a twist coming. Like the conversation is not what you expect it's going to be. But I'll admit that I didn't, right up to the point where it's just told to the audience, here's what the conversation's about. And then, even then, like after the whole murder, again, spoilers for this movie. After the whole murder near the end of the movie, I still didn't even get that, like, oh, the other person got murdered, because it's basically like, so yeah, I'm just admitting I didn't get it at all. Like everyone was 3 or 4 steps ahead of me. So like who Gene
Yeah.
Hackman as what is it? Harry Call? Is that
Harry
his name?
Call.
Yeah, Harry Call. He's maybe 2 steps ahead, and then the people who are actually doing the conversation, they're 3 steps ahead. Or I guess wait, the husband is 1 step ahead. Harry Call's 2 steps ahead, and then the wife and her lover are 3 steps ahead because the whole thing's a setup. The conversation is ultimately a setup to get the husband angry, so that they can get him to a location to murder him and get all the stock options, basically.
Yeah.
So that's the rough encapsulation.
That's a great
of the
breakdown
story.
of what actually takes place in the movie, which is really complicated. It's a little confusing to figure out, like, wait a minute, what is this movie about? And what it's about is exactly what you said. It's about this woman and her lover tricking her husband into going to a hotel room so that they can kill him. And I thought that it was really effective the first time. I was also confused by it. For me, the dream sequence was really unsettling. I want to talk about that, but maybe to start at the beginning, we begin the movie with this really interesting moment where Harry goes home and gets wished a happy birthday and then finds out that his landlady or his super or somebody has been in his apartment, and that really unsettles him. And that's really the first character development that we start to get with Harry, and starting to get a bit of a peek into the control that he's trying to exert on his surroundings. And what the story of the movie is, as we experience it, is Harry's grip on the control of his surroundings sort of getting loosened and loosened and loosened until totally he's lost control of what is going on around him. For me, I thought that the Hitchcockian nature, and Coppola said, you know, if you're going to make a thriller, you have to pay homage to Hitchcock and you have to utilize Hitchcock's techniques, because he just defined the format. And I see a lot of Hitchcock in this movie, but it's such an effective use of the Hitchcock to explore something that, you know, as you're saying, in terms of its thematic resonance, seems to be a lot deeper than just whether or not somebody knows where you live.
Mm-hmm. You know, talking a bit, also what I wrote down early on, like when he goes back to the apartment and he gets upset that his neighbor knows his birthday, and the landlady or whoever like is able to get in the door and leave him a birthday gift. My note was that I put down he's a bit of a Grinch, but Coppola's interpretation of it is he used a Yiddish term, and this is all the trivia I've got, like always, is just what I pulled from the IMDb trivia page. So take it with a grain of salt, maybe true, maybe apocryphal. But the Yiddish term he uses, that he's a bit of a nudnik or nudnik, someone who's like a boring pest. And I think there's something to that, although honestly, I would describe that as basically John Cazale, his partner. But that's also like John Cazale in like every movie, most of the movies that he's in. He was only in 5 movies. You know, he died of cancer, unfortunately, in like the late 70s, early 80s. But he was in the first 2 Godfathers as Fredo, you know, a bit of a nudnik there, a boring pest. I would say a boring pest here. And also in Dog Day Afternoon, which I haven't watched in like 20 years. But I'll just say he was probably that character there too. The other
How weird is it to have not watched something for 20 years? We're both in our 30s. Yeah. And I was just saying to somebody the other day, you know, the year 1995 was 25 years ago. Like, you know, I'm still recalling events from 95 as if they're semi-relevant, you know? You think about all these movies we saw in 2000, 2002. 2005 was 15 years ago. It's crazy. Does it trip you out?
It does. And, you know, I was thinking about that specifically with Dog Day Afternoon. I saw that like on DVD in the early 2000s, and I thought I was late to the party then because it was, you know, 20 plus years old at the time. And I was trying to play catch up with like great films I've never seen. And it was still like another 10 years after that before I saw The Godfather. Like I got the opportunity to see The Godfather when there was like a limited, like 1 or 2 day release in theaters for some, you know, anniversary occasion. And that was great. But, you know, again, that was 10 years ago now. And I think the last time I saw it a couple times. Last time I think I saw part of The Godfather on a plane. But back to the story for this movie, also from IMDb trivia, it said that there were deleted scenes that established that Harry Cole was the owner of the building. So he's not just a tenant. like he owns the building, and it's like that to a degree would justify things like making the argument that you're the only one that should have the key to the apartment. And also, I would say, go
so
ahead.
The building that he owns, I believe, is his workshop building.
Okay,
and then he lives in an apartment separate from the workshop.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Yeah. So, no, go ahead.
Well, I just want to say, like, it would make more sense if he owned the apartment building for him to be allowed to play the saxophone at all hours, which is just, like keeping in line with the idea of like, this is a guy who's super paranoid and like trying to make sure that he's never being observed himself. Like, I don't know why he would like invite that sort of like criticism from the people around him, to be like, oh, I hate my neighbor. Like, you would just think he'd want to be a little more under the radar, because, it's like, as someone who's lived in apartment buildings before, I'm very sensitive to people who are above or below me for whatever reason. And if they were playing the saxophone, it would upset me.
Yeah, no, I had the exact same reaction. I think that Coppola is like, oh, he's this man of taste. He plays the great jazz saxophone. He's got this killer ear. But like you, the only thing that I could think about the whole scene is, oh my God, his neighbors must be so upset. I would be so angry. I was like, my downstairs, I live in a duplex. My downstairs neighbor is like living above an old cat. He's so chill and quiet. It's never a bother at all. But I was just getting angry about the notion of living above or next to or below somebody that was constantly trying to riff with jazz records. That would be just absolutely infuriating. So the movie starts out, we've got the iconic scene in Union Square, San Francisco. Beautiful setup. It's so interesting. It's very disorienting. I think you get a bit of that experience of the people who are in, sorry, my dog's going crazy. My wife just,
that's all right. That's
the people who are in the park among all the people. It's chaotic, right? And at what point in the movie do you start to have context for what's going on with the surveillance? Because for a long time into the movie, even rewatching it, I was confused about who hired him and what the purpose was. And I get that it's meant to be a mystery, but was that confusing to you?
Yeah, well, there's the throwaway line early on. I think it's by John Cazale's character. He's like, he's guessing who the client is, and he's like, I think it might be, he calls them the Infernal Revenue Service. I think that's the joke he uses instead of the Internal Revenue Service. So I just, for whatever reason, I just glommed onto that, and I thought like, oh, this is like a tax fraud thing. That's what the conversation is about. And I guess to an extent, because there's like all the stock options involved when the husband dies and they take controlling interest of the company, there is some financial incentive. And that's always, that's that old cliche about like, what's the answer to 99 out of 100 questions? Money. Like, so to an extent that is correct, but that was like what I was thinking. But then I also thought the other throwaway line, I think from the cop that they're working with, well, just the fact that they're working with a cop, like the cop hired him, I thought this was like I thought the director, Robert Duvall's character was like the director of the FBI. So I thought this was like a government agency, but it was like, it wasn't clear to me until the end of the movie when they talk about the profit motive that, oh, this was like, he's the director of like some business or, private organization. I thought the whole thing was a government fix, but I was wrong.
So, to talk about something that I think Guy Ritchie would have a problem with, I think that that's a flaw in the story, that we don't understand what the stakes are. And the moral dilemma that Harry Caul is enduring is heightened if he's working for a private contractor or a private corporation rather than the U.S. government. Obviously, now we're at a time of ultimate trust and ultimate distrust in the U.S. government. Yeah. But even then, we're talking about Vietnam era, there's not a lot of trust in the US government. I still, however, feel that if the audience felt clearly that he was working for a private man, that the moral dilemma of the situation would weigh in heavier. So speaking of the moral dilemma, there's a really interesting scene and kind of facet of the character, and I guess we're veering into cast a little bit, but Harry's a Catholic and he goes to confession. I thought that the confession scene was a little bit unusual in that I was kind of expecting some sort of a thing to happen beyond just a confession to take place. And that's partly because of the style of the movie. Like within the thriller context, they're kind of setting us up for this confession to come back at him in some way, or to be kind of like a false alarm. And we don't really get either of those payoffs. What are your thoughts on the confession?
Well, again, I just assume that, say, the priest, the person he's giving the confession to, which I believe was Gene Hackman's brother. I think the actor was Gene Hackman's brother. Just more IMDb movie trivia. But I just assume that would be like a plant by the government. You know, I assume, again, the government's in on it, and like this guy's listening in for Uncle Sam. And so, like you're saying, it's going to come back around and be an issue. But then I also think part of that is early on, I started to imagine, and I'm not the only one who imagined this, because again, like other people have said this online, that people kind of treat Gene Hackman's character in the movie Enemy of the State, which came out like 25 years later, the Will Smith action espionage movie. They kind of treat that character as, you know, like the same character, like an aged version of this super paranoid observer who I think, you know, it's, again, speaking about how time flies, I haven't seen Enemy of the State in full since I saw it in the theater in whatever year that was, 98, 99. And
20 years.
Yeah. And I remember that being like, I'm pretty sure it was like his character he had like a Faraday cage and like a complete, like he had completely locked down and like had stopped all incoming, outgoing signal traffic. Like he was completely paranoid at that point. So but again, to the point of why did I think this? Because the bad guy in Enemy of the State is the state. You know, it's like, you know, we're at an all-time high for distrust in the government, but in terms of like movie presentation of that material, it's, you know, same as it ever was. We've been seeing that for at least 25 years, if not longer. And yeah, I have some thoughts on like how easily you could do this movie, The Conversation, again in 2020 as a remake, but we don't have to talk about that right now. What are some other thoughts?
Let's talk through the cast a little bit more.
Okay.
You mentioned a couple of the really funny appearances in this movie. Robert Duvall plays the client, the cuckold in this story, in an uncredited role. I was totally shocked that he showed up, but I was the most shocked. I had totally forgotten Harrison Ford was in the movie. Harry goes to drop off the tape for the first time. The director is out, who we later find out is the director of this company, not the director of the CIA or the FBI or the NSA or something like that. And the assistant director comes to pick him up, and it's waspy prep school Harrison Ford, which is a version of Harrison Ford that I'm not altogether familiar with. You could make the argument that Jack Ryan is of that cut, but I don't totally buy it. I really enjoyed the sort of thought exercise of Harrison Ford as kind of like the sniveling, evil, rich, bad guy. This is made in 1974. There's a couple of really interesting movies he could have made between 1974 and say 1990 as like the rich, waspy, bad guy. I really like that. What'd you think of Harrison Ford? Was that surprising to you?
He was great. Actually, I got to say, first of all, that I kind of spoiled the casting for myself because I was taking notes on the cast before I started the movie. So I looked at who was in it. And I kind of wish I hadn't before I watched it, because it spoiled that Robert Duvall was just going to show up out of nowhere. And it spoiled that Harrison Ford was going to show up out of nowhere. And even to a lesser extent that Terry Garr, the girlfriend, was going to show up out of nowhere, because these are all recognizable faces that I think it would have been more fun to just see them show up without this preconceived understanding that they were going to be there. But you hit the nail on the head with this. With the praise for Harrison Ford's portrayal, I think he did a great job. This is like right off the heels of the George Lucas directed, Coppola produced American Graffiti, which I think came out the year before. And he's just, I mean, he's a star right out of the gate. He's got that one shot where he's just like shooting daggers at Gene Hackman as he's leaving the office, being like, don't get involved in this. And again, I'm assuming don't get involved in this because the NSA or the FBI is going to come after you. The government's going to come after you. But he's great. Again, I don't know how true it is, but the statement I read is that Harrison Ford was trying to play the character as a gay man. So you say waspy.
The wasps are a little bit effete.
Yeah,
I thought his portrayal was great. I agree with you. It's a fantastic performance. For me, the great scene is at the surveillance convention. By the way, I think the only time I ever recall being intrigued by a convention, in person or on film, definitely on film, but I think also in person. I thought that the convention scene was really weird and bizarre and kind of cool. And it was so strange to kind of think about like mid-70s surveillance technology and all these weird, creepy guys coming up with ways to tap into people's phones and set up spy cameras. When I was a kid, there still used to be places called spy stores that would sell like home security systems and little tripwires and stuff like that. And I will never forget, as a little kid, going to this place called the Mercado in Orlando, and I would always get to go to the spy store, and it's just the coolest thing in the world to see all these weird little tricks and gadgets. It's like going to visit Q for a 10-year-old boy. Did you ever get to go to a spy store?
Similar to that, I remember there being like a line of toys when I was a young kid called Spy Tech, and it would be like, like a camera, a small camera that came in like a fake Good and Plenty box, but a fake Good and Plenty box and a real Good and Plenty box is about the same. It just has a hole for the lens. But yeah, there was like, it was definitely, I mean, I guess it's ongoing. I won't even say it's just a moment in time. I think there's always been this sort of continued interest in like this sort of espionage behavior. It was kind of interesting, I think, with the convention, like how it seemed like how on Front Street everyone was about it. Like to have like just, for something that should be very low key, it did seem a little unusual for everyone to, be gathering so publicly. And I also thought, when they were talking about John Cazale in the building, the workshop that Harry owns, I thought that they were talking about like other aliases for Gene Hackman's character. Like they were talking about, remember this guy who, I forget all the names, but this guy who did this really great thing. I thought that they were saying like, this is something that you did, Harry, before you had to change your identity. So I thought there was a lot, and there was a little bit like he moved away from New York to San Francisco, but it wasn't like he just threw out his entire identity. And I thought there was more of that. I thought like he was constantly having to reinvent himself because of the heat coming down on him every 5 or 10 years.
This is a little bit of an era question because this is the era where you just go to a new town and give them your name and they give you a paper driver's license from Phoenix. And like all of a sudden you're not so-and-so anymore. You're this and that. And that's the way it worked. And so going from coast to coast and changing all your friends, like that was basically today's equivalent of a complete facial change, name change, going into a witness protection type overhaul. You just weren't going to find him again. Even in this movie, we see him, he loses his girlfriend. One of the really bizarre interactions in the movie, Harry and his girlfriend that he keeps at this apartment. I don't understand that dynamic at all. But he loses his girlfriend, and the only way he has to get her back is to see if she puts her number in the phone book. So I think that like he just goes from New York to San Francisco and he's disappeared. That scene where they go back to his workshop seemed so risky and insane to me. And in terms of the paranoia building, I wondered if Coppola is consciously trying to shift the anxiety from Harry to the audience, because Harry has kind of left the gate open, so to say. I mean, he goes to sleep with the hooker in his house. He's letting the guy snoop around. He's talking about picking locks. He's wandering off and dancing. He lets the pen get slipped into his lapel. Harry's really being risky. And I wondered if Coppola's trying to consciously shift the anxiety onto the audience, where you as the audience are going, hey, are you sure you should let that girl just stay over?
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to bring up the same point about how crazy it was to have the after party with all these other spies from the convention at, his private workshop, which seemed like a really, something that he was already keeping removed from whatever counted as his personal life. And again, this is a bit of a joke, but if he's already playing saxophone at his apartment, why not just have everyone over to his apartment? And he doesn't have all his work stuff there.
Well, you'll notice in the Justice League, Batman doesn't invite everybody to the Batcave,
Yeah. Everyone hangs out at the Hall of Justice.
That's right. What do you make of the dream sequence? For me, that was not something that worked, and the character information that we do get doesn't particularly humanize Harry further for me. At that point, I sort of understand that he's got like kind of a traumatic relationship to religion and confession and sin. And I also understand that he's a weird dude. Like, I get that he's strange and not connected to people like everybody else. And so we have this bizarre dream sequence. And I guess the big revelations are that he was disabled as a child and that he was healed by holy water, at least as far as he's concerned. And I think the movie kind of intends to portray it as not actually healed by holy water, but he's like, hey, the holy water did something. I got to be a Catholic now, which I'm pretty sympathetic to. What did you make of the dream sequence?
Production-wise, I liked it. Like I've already made the connection between like this and Dracula, which Coppola does, almost 20 years after this movie. So production-wise, I liked it. I like the misty quality. I like the dream-like quality of the dream. It seemed very accurate in that sense. I liked the like this sense of remove between Gene Hackman's character, and I believe the actress is Cindy Williams. I forget her character's name, but like she runs up the stairs and then she's up on the hill and he can't quite reach her, and like he's making these statements that he's not sure she can understand or acknowledge. It all seemed very accurately dreamlike to me. And I like the line in there, which is actually another screen grab I'm using for the thumbnail for this video, which is when he says, "I'm not afraid of death," which seemed like a line. I think it's, he's protesting too much. And with that line, I think to an extent he is afraid of death. But he's in some level of I think the dream is ultimately about his denial about what he is and is not comfortable with. And for that reason, it works, but it's at an hour and 53 minutes. If we had to cut, 4 or 5 minutes here and there, I could cut those 4 or 5 minutes. I would be happy with that being gone, but I would also be happy with the confessional scene being gone. So there's like, I wouldn't say these scenes are fat, but to an extent, as a general exercise, I always try to think like, how could I get this movie, no matter what movie I'm watching, down to 90 minutes? And, for this movie, it's basically cutting 23 minutes out of it.
Does the girlfriend get cut? Does the girlfriend get cut?
I don't, cut or dramatically shortened, because I still think we need the scene with the call girl, prostitute, hooker, friend at the party, the other blonde girl, because that conversation that they have in the warehouse, I think, that conversation is important, but even before that, she has one of the best lines, I think, in the movie, which is, she says, I wrote this down. "When I was a little baby, I used to love to bang my head against the wall. No, really, I did. Sometimes I still feel like doing it because it's comforting." And it's like this sort of like Zen koan for how we keep, everyone is all constantly banging their head against the wall, whether literally or metaphorically. On the surface, it seems like, a dumb blonde kind of thing to say, but secretly very deep statement. And so
yeah.
I think we need that. So I think to get there, we also need a little bit from the girlfriend earlier.
Okay. So
we
for
could
me, just like in later scenes, I was distracted by my own neuroses, just like with the saxophone. I was like, oh my God, dating in middle age is just the worst. You and I recently had a conversation about, what if you had to start dating again in your 40s and how difficult that would be? And I kind of felt exactly the same way that he did about the situation. Like, if I had to do it, the way that I would do it is I would keep like a nice, simple girl in some apartment. And sometimes I would pop in and see her when I was lonely. I wouldn't tell her anything about me. There would be absolutely no intimacy, but we might have a sip of wine and ease my loneliness from time to time. I think that's literally the only way I could comprehend doing it again. I don't know.
I get that too. What was the deal with the gift wrapped bike on the wall? Did he buy her that for Christmas? That was her present in Terry Garr's apartment. Did you recognize this prop?
I don't know. I thought it was a really bizarre thing, and I wondered if like some of this is like, are we too young to understand that? I was confused by the whole arrangement. Like, what woman signs up for this? Maybe that's really the greatest sign of progress for women's rights in America, is that 1974, everybody watched this Francis Ford Coppola movie, was like, oh yeah, she just waits at the apartment for him. She has nothing going for herself. She just sits there and waits. To me, I was just so confused. I was like, who is this girl? She just sits at the apartment? It's very bizarre to me. But I do think it revealed, as you're saying, a lot about Harry's character. Can we talk a little bit more about the crew? He's got a real motley crew of compatriots here. My favorite was Paul. I liked Paul the most. Stan, obviously you've talked about. John Cazale. I don't know how to say his last name.
Oh, I watched there was an HBO documentary about him about 10 years ago. So I just watched the trailer for that today, and they say John Cazale.
John Cazale. John Higgins, Paul. What did you think about the crew? And then also, can we talk a little bit about the surveillance folks from a casting standpoint?
Sure. Okay. So I already talked a bit about John Cazale. I want to talk about, is the other guy's name Bernie, the heavyset fella? That's kind of the competition. Oh yeah. Is his name Bernie?
Yeah.
Okay. So he's really interesting. I think if you make the movie today, he is definitely played by Dan Fogler. There's no way around that. You know this guy?
I don't know this guy.
He's the heavy-set fellow, also has a mustache in both of the new Harry Potter movies, the non-Harry Potter movies, like The Crimes of Grindelwald. Yeah, you didn't see him. And he was also in the ping pong movie several years ago, Balls of Fury. But anyway, he would definitely be that character today. It's like, he really reminded me of Dan Fogler, whoever was playing Bernie in the 70s. But he is, we already mentioned this. I don't get why you invite this guy back to your workshop. It just seems like he's going to grab everything that's not nailed down. But he
was uncomfortable to be around, rude, and very, very untrustworthy.
Yeah. You wouldn't want him in your house. You wouldn't want him in your workspace. He had an interesting sales pitch at the convention, right? Where he's got this spy device in theory that you call a number and you blow in the phone and dial the last digit and you have something installed over there. And then they don't even have to pick up, and it just starts recording. And it's but it's a setup. It's like a gag about how his wife's immediately going to cheat on him. So I guess the joke there is that he doesn't have that device. But then I thought at the end of the movie, he might be working with Harrison Ford and actually use that device on Gene Hackman's apartment, because Gene Hackman is guaranteed bugged at the end of the movie. We know that for sure. How is he bugged? The only setup for that was that Bernie has this sort of fantastic or fantastical device that could do that sort of thing. So I thought that's it's not outright said, but I thought it's a possibility. At first it's a setup, it's a joke. And then the reveal for the savvy viewer maybe is that, this actually is something he can do. And he sold it to the people who are, spying on Harry.
Yeah. In Point Break, we had Chekhov's rotating lawnmower. which
Yeah.
eventually came back to cause some trouble for Johnny Utah. And in this movie, we have, a different iteration of that for sure, which is either Chekhov's magic remote bugging device, or in the other scenario, if he's not working for him, Chekhov's magic landlady spare key.
Right.
Non-traditional uses of the device, but I'm down. I'm in for it. Big payoffs. Let's move into the reception of this movie. We've talked about it a little bit. It was nominated for the Academy Award, but also it won the Palme d'Or in the summer before the Academy Awards. So kind of the way that the awards season works is the awards that can win Oscars are eligible if they come out in the calendar year, and the Cannes Film Festival happens in the summertime, and there's only certain films that compete for that. But this film competes for the Palme d'Or in the summer, wins, beats a couple of pretty impressive movies. It beats Robert Altman's Thieves Like Us and Steven Spielberg in his directorial debut, a film called Sugarland Express with Goldie Hawn. Have you ever seen Spies Like Us or Sugarland Express?
No, I haven't. And I know I should. It's, it's on the list. It's stuff that I got to check out. But I, even without seeing those, I get why this one would win. Like, this was so good. It was one of those movies that when it was over, like, I was anxious to watch it again. I felt like, if not outright, just like rewinding the tape and playing it back immediately. Like, I thought if anyone, if I was with, Alana, my wife, or with my family or whoever else wanted to watch a movie and they wanted to watch The Conversation, I would be down. Even if it was next week, I'm ready. It was very enjoyable. And that's even keeping in mind, my, that rule or that exercise I'm always trying to do of seeing, like, how can I get this movie down to 90 minutes? But great movie. I think it's got like a 98% on Rotten Tomatoes, and I think that's accurate. Strangely though, I have a digital copy. This is on Amazon Prime right now, which I think is going to be, if people want to watch it, the most convenient way to watch it. But I had a digital copy on Vudu that I just hadn't gotten around to watching. And the audience on Vudu has only given it a 3.1 out of 5, which I think is low. So I don't know what's up with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I guess to transition from the reception into the filmmaking, it's a really kinetic movie. That first scene in Union Square, I think it's one of the great kind of public space scenes in film. There's a bunch of really iconic moments where there's this big set piece with all these moving pieces and hundreds of extras, and it's a real piece out of an American city. And I think this is one of the most artful versions of that. Like, it really feels like you're at Union Square in San Francisco on lunch break. It's so cool and kinetic. And then from that point forward, the thriller nature of the filmmaking and the Hitchcockian building and the tension that is being created is so effective. I rewound it while watching it to see him show up to the office, because I felt like I had this sensation, oh my gosh, Harrison Ford's in this movie. And then the next thing I knew, they were talking, but a bunch of things had happened on the screen. And there's a really bizarre lapse in conversation that takes place. Harrison Ford kind of goes to pick him up from the reception area, and they don't speak. And it's kind of a weird, tense corridor walk if you're not caught off guard by Harrison Ford. And I think there's a lot of moments like that where it's a really small choice to not have Harrison Ford speak as he's bringing him from the lobby back to the office, but it has a really significant impact on the film.
Yeah, I just wonder. So with the first scene, I really like the zoom in camera that is, I think, making the point of, there's all this noise. Where is the signal in this shot? Like, what is the important information here? So early on while watching that, I'm trying to guess what the signal is, and I got it dead wrong. I thought it was a couple people like on the right side on a bench. I was just trying to figure out, okay, what is the important part of this? And I got that wrong. And then I wondered early on in that scene, in terms of filmmaking, is this an early example or the earliest example of the trope, which is now a standby, now a trope of FBI surveillance in a van, an unmarked van? This is like 1974. I don't know. I'm sure. I mean, maybe, I don't know. I'm not sure. Like, what would be an earlier example, if any, of people doing this exact same thing in a movie? Or, if it is the first example, where is it coming from? Like, where is Coppola getting this idea?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And it really might be. The movie comes out just after the Watergate scandal, which was apparently a great frustration of Coppola, because he felt like he was trying to make this movie about this bizarre world of surveillance and paranoia. And then Watergate just happened, and everyone was thinking about people listening to conversations, secretly recording, tapping stuff, bugging stuff. But to your point, this is really early for all of that technology. And so it might be reasonable that it didn't appear on film before that, because it wasn't really technologically available. It's almost like saying, well, when was the first text message on film? Well, it couldn't have been in 88 because nobody had texted. And so this is pretty early in the evolution of this kind of portable, affordable surveillance technology. That's a really interesting question to consider. I'd be really curious to know if somebody could come up with an earlier example.
Yeah, if anyone's watching this right now and you want to let us know in the chat, I'm totally interested to find out. I will mention now, I didn't stop the show while we were going, but we have gotten a couple comments from, I think, a friend of yours, because he says hi to you specifically. Username Unstoppable Cockblocka, and he's saying, "Hey Jack, spoilers are okay." So this was a while ago, and he compliments you on the Hendrix photo. But if Unstoppable or anyone else is watching right now and you know about earlier examples of this trope of unmarked FBI surveillance van, I got to know. Another one like that is, again, 1974. I'm thinking the sort of the audio distortion noises are novel at the time. Like, if this movie comes out 10 years later, it's very much like in line with, 80s digital sort of audio effects. Like, I'm getting that sort of vibe from it. Like, I don't know, Tron or something. But like here, again, it's making me think like this seems early, and I don't know, is this like a fantastic representation of what this audio technology could do in a movie? Or is it supposed to be like close to reality? Like, is this really sort of like the noise and feedback you would get using this equipment and doing this kind of surveillance work? I'm not sure. Thoughts on that? Fantastic or reality?
That's interesting to consider. I think it's very rooted in reality. One of the things that's always been so curious to me about Coppola is that he considers himself a writer first and a director second. And so when I think about this in terms of its writing and its construction, the reason that I would say it's rooted in reality is I sort of see this as Coppola taking this thing that is a technological innovation, right? The capacity to hear what's going on without people knowing that you're hearing, to explore something that is probably present in everybody's psyche. I mean, I think all of us have some paranoia about oh no, what if they knew about this part of me? Or what if they heard this conversation? And so how does technological innovation change the neuroses that we already live with day in and day out? And I thought that was one of the best kind of marriages of the sort of tropes of the thriller genre with kind of the themes of the movie, and then the specific plot elements and characters and events that take place. I thought that those things all married together so well, and that's why this film is so successful, because it's not just a suspenseful experience, but it's a suspenseful experience that reveals some of the things that not knowing creates in us, the different anxieties and fears and reactions, sometimes rash or inappropriate, that creates in us. I thought it was really interesting. I also thought it's got a pretty strong anti-capitalist message, and obviously the Godfather and its themes are much beyond the mob. What did you think Coppola was saying about society in this movie as the kind of guy that's inclined to make gestures about what's going on in society?
The simplest summation I think is that there are no happy endings. If he's trying to say anything, I think it's basically that. I'm like, you can be paranoid, you can be concerned or anxious about what others may or may not know about you, but only God forgives, so to speak. So I think it's ultimate. And, to contrast this with The Gentleman, and maybe even like the way that films are made now versus the 70s in general, I don't think the conversation did not shy away from having an ambiguous ending at best and a downright desolate ending at worst, depending on your interpretation of it. Whereas The Gentleman, I think, is like it's a little out of left field how happy of an ending Matthew McConaughey has in that. Like, it seems like he's cruising for a bruising, so to speak. Whereas here, I almost expected up to the last scene, like even when he's ripping apart his apartment trying to find the bug, I thought the next thing he does is he goes over to Terry Garr and he apologizes and they find true love and happily ever after. But that's not what happens. He's alone in his apartment playing saxophone and it's completely wrecked. And also keep in mind, like if that was some place you were renting in San Francisco today, easily $5,000 a month, no debate. And the camera also with the sparse end credits is doing like a surveillance sweep. It's going back and forth like a surveillance camera. Again, IMDb trivia. I can't take credit for that observation, but it's again, no happy endings is what I think he's trying to say.
Yeah, it's really interesting, the ending, because it does deny a certain kind of fulfillment. Even if you're fulfilled with kind of the arc of Harry Call, you can't be fulfilled with his search of the apartment because Harry's unfulfilled by the search of the apartment. And so, the ending inherently denies you something that you want. And then certainly I think that you would want, Harry to not be like left alone and robbed by this woman that he poured his heart out to. And then the other woman that he pours his heart out to is just trying to use and abuse him to murder her husband. So Harry's got an incredibly unfulfilling story arc, for sure. And to think about how Harry's story relates to surveillance, I guess when I think about the film, at the end of the day, what I come away with is the sense that we are all complicit in things that make us uncomfortable, and that's the way that it is. And Harry Cole just wants to kind of do his job and this, that, and the other, but he's complicit. And these guys that work for Harry, they don't have any idea what's going on, but they're complicit. The guy who hired Harry was complicit in his own death, and so when I look at this film, that's something that I see, is that intentional or not, we end up being complicit in things that we don't agree with.
Mm-hmm. I would think, again, going back to the paranoia of the character of Harry Cole, I would think that he would want more detail. You made the comment like he's just trying to do his job. But I wrote down this line from early on. He says, "I don't care what they're talking about. All I want is a nice fat recording." But I would again think with like the paranoia, he would want to know everything that was going on to have a better sense of like who was out to get him, if anyone was out to get him. So that to me, it didn't quite track. Like I would just think that he would want to know, what was the meat of the conversation, just to help with trying to figure out who's out to get him, dealing with the paranoia. So.
Yeah. Interesting movie for sure. I'm going to give it 2 thumbs up. I'd recommend it, if nothing else, to see how another super gifted filmmaker explores a Hitchcockian building of suspense, and then also an all-time great Gene Hackman performance for sure.
Mm-hmm. I like it too. I only have one thumb to give, but I'll say thumbs up. I enjoyed it. You know, it's funny. There's another podcast, the Weekly Planet Pod, that mainly does like genre stuff, like comic books and superhero movies. But their rating system is always just it's the worst movie ever or it's the best movie ever. And if those are if it's like this binary option, this sort of Manichean interpretation of reality, then I'll say in that sense best movie ever. Like I already said, I was anxious to watch it again. Although, in terms of the hierarchy of Coppola, it's really only somewhere in the middle for me, because I think, well, maybe second place on a good day, but I still give it to Dracula. Dracula is my number one for Coppola.
What? Dracula is your number one? The Bram Stoker one with Keanu Reeves?
Yeah, well, I mean, I like him in that. I like a lot of that movie, and I like Keanu in that. We don't have to make this a whole. We could do Dracula later on as a review. Probably
Dracula
not next.
Later on, but let's just confirm that you watch Godfather 2 and say, "Well, no, Bram Stoker's Dracula."
Yeah, it's been about 10 years since I watched Godfather Part 2. It might be time to go back and watch it again. I do remember very vividly the scene where De Niro, kills the former mob boss and then like breaks the gun and is dropping it like in a series of chimneys. And I just remember that being like an elaborate, way to get away with it. But I'm sure there's a lot of, the whole Fredo, you broke my heart, that sort of thing. But it's probably time to go back to it. But I still think I'm going to like Dracula the best. And there's a reason for that ties in with our discussion of this movie. You talked already about how you think Coppola, or you said Coppola sees himself as a writer first. And I think that's interesting considering that most of his most famous movies are adaptations of existing works. And that also he's usually got three hats. He's usually the producer, the writer, and the director. So I was thinking with this movie, like say for what we already discussed in terms of why would he go back to his warehouse for the after party? Now, if I put on my producer hat and I'm thinking about how much money we're spending on locations, then it makes sense for that reason. Like it didn't necessarily look like a super expensive movie, but like in terms of like saving on location scouting, it makes sense from the producer's point of view. So I'm always thinking another interesting example of that is that stretch Mercedes at the end that the widow is in is Coppola's car that Paramount bought for him after the success of The Godfather.
That's great.
So
yeah, no, that's an important consideration. The different roles that he's playing on his movies. I agree. The best movies from him are movies that he didn't write the base material for. I actually went to graduate school with the guy that was the ghostwriter for the sequels to The Godfather. And nobody respected him as a writer whatsoever. I don't even remember his name. You could like look up whoever wrote the sequels to The Godfather, but he was just like a dog shit writer and no one ever took him seriously at all. But he was famous from that and taught, writing at Florida State University.
Are we
Not
talking,
to anybody's,
Are we talking specifically about The Godfather Part 3?
No, he wrote the novel sequels to The Godfather novel.
Okay.
Yeah. But literally everyone just thought that he was, a joke of a writer. Kind of like the way that people felt about like everybody that came to the University of Arkansas after Skip Hayes and Ellen Gilchrist. None of them were real writers.
But it's shots fired.
Like that. Shots fired. By the way, this is Bob Dylan. I wish it was Hendrix, but it's Bob Dylan actually.
Oh my gosh, that's embarrassing for me because I didn't even I had an hour to think about that comment before I said it out loud, and I didn't pay close enough attention. But
yeah, that's Bob Dylan playing a bass, but whatever. It's in black and white, so it's harder to tell. And the good news is race is a construct. We want to be post-racial. We're moving on. We're starting with Bob Dylan and Jimi Hendrix. Who knows who's who?
Yeah, that's good. That's so funny. Okay, so have we said?
Speaking of moving on,
yeah.
what are we going to talk about next?
All right. Yeah. So we've said our piece on the conversation. This is not my suggestion for what we should do next, but if you're at home and you enjoyed like the one scene, if you watched the conversation, you enjoyed the one scene that Gene Hackman and Terry Garr had together, and you're like, I wish someone would put those two in a romantic comedy. Well, they did. 15 years after this movie came out, they were in a 1988 film called Full Moon and Blue Water, which is hard to come by now. It's not on any of the streaming platforms. There's no digital copy. You have to buy like a used DVD for $80. I don't know if like the studio is trying to bury it because it's bad, but that's more traditional. Like one of them owns a restaurant, they fall in love, that sort of thing. I don't think we should do that one though. Just like one more piece of trivia of those two characters. I do have a thought though. I have a couple contenders. I think it'd be interesting. I know we both love when the BBC put out in the last couple of years, like their list of, it was the BBC or the AFI said the best 100 films of the 21st century. We both made our own list. And I think we both talked about how much we enjoyed Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. Now there's no specific connection between this movie and that movie. So we're just kind of jumping from place to place. So I like that as an option for us to talk about because we've both seen it a lot. I'm sure we'd be happy to watch it again. Or if we want a stronger connection here, I think we could go to the last of the John Cazale movies that I've never seen, and I've got a digital copy ready. And I think it might also be streaming somewhere else, The Deer Hunter. I've never seen it. It's been on my list. I've meant to see it. But those are two that I think would be good for us to talk about. Do you have any other options we should consider?
Yeah, I think those are both really great options and movies that I'd love to talk about. I've never seen The Deer Hunter either. But I'd like to talk about something a little funnier, a little lighter. I think maybe if there's a connection to Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, auteurs, they're both auteurs, right?
Yeah.
So, there's a connection. But I'd love to talk Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. That's a funny movie. It's a great movie. Who knows? Maybe it'll inspire a couple of people to try to make movies. It's the COVID era. Everything's getting made digitally. Go to make a movie. We'll talk Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. You'll get inspired to be a screenwriter. It'll be fantastic. So I don't think that's available anywhere, but everyone should buy that movie regardless, right?
Oh yeah, that was one. I don't have it handy, but that's one I just have on Blu-ray. Like I was just going to hold up the disc to the camera and be like, I'm good to go. I got a hard copy. But
it's worth it.
Before we decide on that though, I want to know, do you have another option or two that we should think about watching?
Well, I really like the idea of kind of flip-flopping between modern movies and older movies. And I really like Little Women. And I'd like to talk about Little Women as a movie at some point. That's something on my list. I was thinking, we've done all these like just boy bullshit movies over and over again. And I'm going to kind of include the conversation in that a little bit because like he literally doesn't have a meaningful relationship with a woman for sure. And so I was thinking like, well, what else could we explore? And I think there's so many things, obviously, but I thought Little Women was a great movie. And I kind of underestimated how good it would be as a movie. I don't have a strong relationship to any of the past iterations of Little Women. I doubt you do. You don't have any sisters.
Right.
But that could be an interesting movie to talk about at some point. Also, I like thinking about the idea of Greta Gerwig as kind of like the evolved reader of hipster runoff. Like, what if somebody that was a really big fan of the hipster runoff blog grew up and was 40 and they made movies? What would that be like? Because I think some of her early work, and I'm unfortunately going to include Lady Bird in this, it's a little bit of hipster bullshit. But I think that she's kind of moving beyond it in Little Women. It's interesting.
It's funny you saying that. And I was also very cognizant of the fact that we've kind of, with the last three reviews, like it's been not stuck in a rut, but we're definitely talking more guy-centric films. And, certainly films that don't pass the Bechdel test, which you gave me that funny text the other day. Like you just watched that Rick and Morty about the story train where like he's trying to get Morty like has to create like a scene that passes the Bechdel test. He's really struggling with it. But what about something by Sofia Coppola? That has a. Is that just right out?
That's a great connection. I'll tell you my favorite Sofia Coppola movie and the most fun Sofia Coppola movie to argue about. My favorite Sofia Coppola movie is a movie called Somewhere, and that is actually streaming right now. The most fun to argue about Sofia Coppola movie is Marie Antoinette with Kirsten Dunst.
Oh, wait, so the movie is Marie Antoinette or the movie is Somewhere?
Somewhere is a film.
Okay.
Marie Antoinette is another film.
Okay.
Somewhere is about an actor in LA who is staying at the Chateau Marmont and recovering from a broken wrist. And it's just sort of like a week in his life. And Marie Antoinette is about the famous French queen, Marie Antoinette, starring Kirsten Dunst as Marie Antoinette.
I think of those two. I haven't seen either. I'm leaning towards Somewhere. Can we lock in that? Would you be interested in doing that for our next review?
We can lock in Somewhere, although it's only about a guy and his guy problems. Oh my God.
Wait, okay,
we got to do Marie Antoinette.
We'll do Marie Antoinette. Is that the better choice?
There's no females. The only women in the movie Somewhere are two escorts that come and pole dance in his hotel room. We can't do it. We will not do it.
This reflects very poorly on me, even when I make the effort to be more inclusive. Like I can't even do it purposefully, consciously. I always just err on the side of this.
We've acknowledged our privilege. We're changing. We're going to watch a female-centric film. We're going to watch Marie Antoinette. Women creators creating.
That sounds great. We'll do that. Come up in a week or two. So do you know where that's available?
Prepare for bad reviews. It could be rough. I love it.
Is this on Amazon or what?
I don't know where it is.
Okay, but we can find it. And I'm willing to buy it. If I have to get like a used copy or something, I'm more than willing to do that.
I'll bet they're available. I'll say that.
Okay, all right. Okay, so
if somebody bought it, they might have put it up.
Yeah. All right, this was fun, like always. Thanks everyone that joined us for the stream. Again, anyone that wants to leave a comment, that wants to vote, or just like put a contender in, put a thought in on what you want us to review coming up. We are more than willing to take viewer suggestions. Am I right?
Yeah, and we've got a special guest coming up soon with Blade Runner.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So our buddy Dave, when we talk about Blade Runner, it'll be a 3-man review for that. But essentially, that is it for this time. So thanks everyone again for joining us, and we will see y'all next time.
We'll be listening.